Okay, this shouldn't be too long, but I did want to kind of elaborate on some of the conclusions coming out of the French and Indian War. Again, the Treaty of Paris was going to be, in the eyes of the British, just uh, a windfall as far as their now being the uncontested power in North America. But that is going to, at the same time, sow the seeds of discontent between the British and the colonists in the British colonies of the Americas themselves. Um, Again, in this slide, you can see kind of the different, you know, the scope of the war in the new uh, in North America itself between New France and the you know Europe, or I should say, English possessions along the eastern seaboard here. But it gets also at the kind of cross currents here of identity. Um, that in many cases you see the kind of more reserved, kind of cerebral types of interests embodied within the Britain itself, and kind of being able to see all the pieces on the chessboard, as it were, as far as their empire was concerned, and that the American colonies were a piece of it, but they weren't the entirety of it. Um, in opposition to that, you have within the American kind of colonial view this idea of more immediate, impulsive kinds of interests at hand. That this is more for them, maybe an existential type of endeavor as far as their efforts to fulfill their own self-interest as far as what that is, whether it's kind of economic independence and kind of self-sufficiency, or bettering themselves from one social you know uh, class to another, becoming landowners in their own right, um, and having that threatened not only by kind of Native American intrusions, or any type of threat from neighboring empires like this new France type of element, French interest, but also now they see their own uh, uh, perceived protectors, the British Crown itself, as part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And that was especially pronounced following in the years following the French and Indian War. I mean, those wartime policies had really kind of hurt relations between the colonists and the British state, British Parliament, and the monarchy itself. But now that was even coming into effect in the post-war era, um, as seen, as I explained, with the Proclamation line of 1763. This effort to curtail any further westward migration of the colonists outside of the 13 colonies. And the reason for that was that they didn't want that to act as a point of tension or potential conflict with Native Americans in the Ohio Valley, or elsewhere, because the British didn't want to have to commit additional troops and resources to protecting the interests and the expansive interests of the colonists themselves. And as that becomes more and more the case, colonists are going to argue, well, if you're not here to represent our interests, then why are these British troops here at all? And so, in many respects, the British become part of the problem rather than the actual solution. Um, so, what can be taken away from that? Well, I think it gets at this idea of identities changing over time, and that you're going to have people being respectful of one another's identities at some points, and then people not being failing to recognize or um, um, and honor, or kind of um, commit to identities of others at other times. Either there's no need to, as far as the British government not realizing that, or that there's some sort of American identity that's being percolating within the colonies themselves. They considered them British subjects, and that was the way it was. But there was an element within the colonies that was arguing, and kind of beginning to emphasize some sort of separate identity, an American identity. And so, um, that is not necessarily, you might say, unique to the American experience, but I, it is, um, one of numerous examples that can be pointed to, specifically in the kind of modern era, as it were, where um, you've got to, even in the 21st century, begin to acknowledge identities that wish to be acknowledged in some cases. Whether that is, um, something that needs to be, eh, followed through on or not, can be debated, but at the very least, that there needs to be some sort of, understanding, or maybe a rededication to the place that identity has within, um, what's often perceived to be maybe a homogenous society itself. Now, in the American experience, even from its early foundations, even predating the foundation of an official independent state, I think it's fair to say that the colonies along the eastern seaboard here had a very rich complexity to them, that there was a measure of diversity, um, throughout the colonies themselves to a large degree. And of course, all of them were not represented, all of them were not, um, all of their concerns were not voiced and um, catered to. But you know, the idea of there being kind of this idea of either being one or kind of a collection. Well, it's always been really kind of a hybrid of both at the same time, coexisting. And so, um, what's interesting, I think, about the American experience is that, and the American identity is that oftentimes that's been done, in a way that is, uh, more complicated than we like to give uh, validity to. That in many cases, we like to consider ourselves either a multicultural state or a kind of a mixing pot. Well, oftentimes it is, um, one is actually dependent on the other in many cases. And it's that kind of overlap, it's that kind of hybrid, that makes the American experience unique, and kind of is, key to kind of coming to understand what the American identity is all about. And I think you get a sense of that, or at least a survey of that here in this time period of time, roughly the 1800s, excuse me, this 18th century, the 1700s, getting us up to 1763. All right. So I'll leave things there. And when we come back, I'll talk about the kind of maturation and decline of the Tokugawa system and era in Japan. All right. Stay tuned.